Talk.
My last name is Lee, Bruce Lee. I was born in San Francisco in 1940.
He sure knows how to fight for his defense, discarding all his limbs the tense. Power glistens in his eyes, he strikes terror with his cries. He's the king of kung fu, king of kung fu, king of kung fu. Let him show what he can do. He's the king of kung fu, king of kung fu, king of kung fu. Let him show what he can do. He uses every human capability with a fingertip sensitivity. His kung fu courage set in motion. It's a massive dynamic explosion. Power fills his eyes as he strikes terror with his cries. He's the king of kung fu, king of kung fu, king of kung fu. Let him show what he can do.
It's a fabulously ridiculous song, which we've played on the show quite a few times. I love that song. It's a theme tune to a film that doesn't even feature Bruce Lee in, but we remember we spoke a couple of weeks ago to Michael, who is making a documentary about Bruce-ploitation movies, like Bruce Lee and Bruce Lee and Dragon Lee and all of that. And I love all that stuff. I love all that stuff. I really do. But when I was a kid, my first ever actual proper hero at the age of 10 was Bruce Lee. And I don't know, well, first of all, I don't know why my parents allowed me to watch those movies, because they were X-rated. Proper X-rated, with scenes of nudity and extreme violence, although the English ones were cut to pieces. But I was obsessed, completely obsessed with Bruce Lee. And it was in the days when we had a Betamax video recorder, and we would go to the video store, and they had all these, kind of strange-looking, wonderful Betamax videos with these beautifully ornate covers, and I was absolutely hooked. And I bought books and I bought magazines, and I started learning kung fu a little bit later on. For a few years, I was never any good at it. I had a little go, and then every now and then other obsessions have come into my life, and family and work and things like that. But every now and then I go, oh, I remember just how much I used to love Bruce Lee. And all the films are now on wonderful DVDs with extra discs and bonus footage and stuff like that. And I remember dragging a girlfriend, about 10 years ago, when they were showing Fist of Fury at the BFI. I dragged her along and she did not enjoy it. But every now and then I go, oh, I remember how much I love Bruce Lee, and I'll dig out my DVDs and watch them, which is why it's such a thrill to have the next guest on the show. He is responsible. Well, we'll find out exactly how responsible he is for getting those DVDs and all the bonus footage. But he does absolute cracking commentary on all of the Bruce Lee DVDs, and really, it's so knowledgeable about Bruce and about the subject of Hong Kong cinema. It's just a joy to sit and listen to him while the films are playing away, and I'm so thrilled. It's Bey Logan. Good evening, Bey. Good morning, Bey.
Good evening. Good morning for me. Evening for you. Hi, Ian. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine, thank you. I also, when I was a little kung fu boy, in the sort of mid-'80s, I also used to subscribe to Combat magazine, which you were the editor of, weren't you?
And I was. It's been downhill from there all the way. But, that was my first real gig in the martial art movie world.
How did you get into martial arts, Bey?
From when I was very, very young, I remember being completely fascinated and obsessed with the moving image in all its manifestations, and like martial arts. And the first ever exposure I had to it would have been you may be too young to remember the Avengers TV series.
God bless you. I'm aware of it, but I didn't see it the first time around. Yes.
So it was playing on our little black and white set with Diana Rigg as Emma Peel, was flipping people around.
Yeah.
And in the Bond movies, and I just remember being aware of this unarmed combat style. And in the Captain America comic books, you had Batroc Viliper using savate.
Yeah.
So I was just fascinated by these things. And then actually the first, the Kung Fu TV series with David Carradine, who later became a good friend of mine, that was the first exposure to Kung Fu with like the dragon and the tiger and the snake styles and going to Shaolin Temple and the idea that a white guy could do this stuff, you know, because Margaret Cho said it shouldn't have been called Kung Fu, it should have been called Who's That White Guy?
Yeah,
and,
it's hard to remember now, but Kung Fu, the show with David Carradine, was absolutely massive. I remember being obsessed with it. I had posters of David. I had the Kung Fu Annual. Yeah, everyone was doing, you know, all the comedy shows were doing Grasshopper spoofs. It was massive, wasn't it?
Well, there was the goodies. Remember Eki Thump? That was such
a... yeah. I do remember that, yes.
And but the thing with the Kung Fu TV series was, compared to Bruce Lee, was it always it's one of the things I'm covering in my upcoming book, plug Bruce Lee and I, is the fact that even though Bruce Lee is perceived as being a Kung Fu star, he really didn't do any Kung Fu in his films, or minimally did he perform Kung Fu in his movies. In fact, he was doing a kind of hyped up kickboxing, or you could say he was doing MMA at the beginning of Enter the Dragon, but he wasn't doing the stylized Shaolin traditional Kung Fu that you saw depicted in the Kung Fu TV series of David Carradine, and of course later, and probably much better, by Lau Garlang, Liu Chaliang at Shaw Brothers in those films. So there were two streams. There was Kung Fu, which was the TV series, and then maybe Shaw Brothers and Golden Harvest movies, and Bruce Lee, who is a phenomenon unto himself. And people put these kind of conditioners on. They say he was the greatest Chinese Kung Fu Hong Kong movie star in the world. No, he is the biggest movie star in the world, all time, that's ever been. The biggest real-life human... Like, the only people comparable would be Superman, Batman, Tarzan, those kind of people. But globally, if you show anybody a picture, you go to some remote African village, and, you know, the only thing you'll see on the wall will be a poster of Bruce Lee.
Yeah. Isn't it funny?
Global.
How did you end up... there's so much I want to ask you, Bey, because honestly, your commentaries on those Bruce Lee films, they breathe new life into them. How did you end up going to working... and do you live in Hong Kong?
I live in Hong Kong. I've been here for about 23, 24 years now. Right. And my main livelihood is being a film producer. My most recent... Well, I did a run of films the last couple of years, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Sword of Destiny, Lady Blood Fight, and I just finished Kickboxer Retaliation, which is coming out next year.
Yeah.
So I do that as my main job. And as a sideline, there's a saying in Chinese, when you drink the water, remember from where the water flows. So to me, my livelihood every day making films and working with people like Jackie Chan and Donnie Yen is kind of drinking the water. And where it flows from is, of course, Bruce Lee and all the classic Chinese Kung Fu movies. So I see myself at a midpoint where I'm making new films and I'm celebrating the earlier ones.
Yeah.
And for me, my kind of the thing that instigates me to do new things is often, the same reason I wrote my book, Hong Kong Action Cinema, many moons ago, was I would be constantly saying to people, when is somebody going to write a beginner's definitive guide to Hong Kong film that I can read? And they never did. So finally, I think my girlfriend at the time said, well, quit belly aching and why don't you write the damn thing? And that became that book. And then with the commentaries, it was kind of the same. And one of the producers of Enter the Dragon did a commentary on the Warner Brothers DVD, and I thought it was just so poor. It was just so ill-researched and so unengaging. So I was bitching and moaning about it, and then somebody at the offices of Media Asia, where I was working at the time, said, well, if you're so smart, why don't you do one to show us how it can be done? And we had the rights. We released, for some reason, there was a delay in the rights for us to re-release Fist of Fury in Hong Kong on DVD, just for Hong Kong market. And I really have to thank, there were two guys at Media Asia, Nicholas James and Thomas Chung, who were my bosses at the time, who gave me an enormous amount of leeway to pursue different ventures. And one of them said, okay, go in the studio, we'll pay for the studio time, and go in and do the commentary. And I went to do the first one, Fist of Fury, and I thought to myself, well, I've seen this movie 15 times, or 50 times.
Yeah.
I won't need any notes. I'll just go in and watch the movie and tell everybody all the things I know. Halfway through the first recording session, I completely dried up, and I said, please, can we stop? I'll come back tomorrow. So I went home, and I got out my Rolodex, and I called up everybody I knew who had been in the movie. And by this point, I knew people who had been stuntmen on the movie, like a guy called Zebra Pan, Ban Majai, like a guy called Chen Wing-ai, Abi, like a guy called Peter Chan, Chan Long. And I would just call these guys up and say, what do you remember? What do you know? What do you remember? What do you know? And then call Louis Sitt, who'd been the production manager at Golden Harvest, and just take notes. And then finally, and I talked to other critics in Hong Kong, and I came back the next day prepared and finished it, and I thought, whew, okay. And it might sound ridiculous now, but I actually thought, okay, that's off my bucket list, and I never have to go through that again.
Yeah.
Aha. So then we did a deal to sell the movies, to license the films to a label in England that became Hong Kong Legends, which is, I think, probably where you first became aware of the commentaries.
Yeah.
And when they got the deal, they said to Media Asia, and by the way, can you get that guy back to do more of the commentaries, because we like the one on Fist of Fury.
Brilliant.
And then at the beginning of it, I was like, people normally would pay for me to shut up. So the idea of them paying for me to talk was a new concept. And I was like, no one's going to want to hear me talk all the way through all of these films. So we tried to get some other guys in at the beginning of the Hong Kong Legends era, but none of them really worked out, so it just became, you have to do them. So it became a sideline, and it was like, my highest, yeah.
I was going to say, I love it, right? Very rarely can I sit through a commentary, right? But if it's a producer or something, I don't know, there's something about it. But I a couple of years ago, I went on a massive Bruce Lee kick, and I watched them all, and then I watched them all again with your commentary. And it's such a joy hearing someone who's not directly involved with the film, but you've got the passion that I had watching it, and you can hear the passion. And also, you'll be talking about a scene, and then you go, right, that guy there, he was, and you'll go off on this wonderful, wonderful tangent about someone who's walked past in the background, and then kind of regain. It's just a joy to listen to.
Well, it's interesting because I do think I have on occasion done commentaries for my own movies. And it's very difficult because you end up self-censoring because you're thinking, well, I better not say that because I don't want to hurt that fellow's feelings. Or there's not so much, strangely, there's not so much to say because it's like, it's not a Bruce Lee movie. Maybe the movie that I made was just a contemporary action picture that we just did. And so it's harder, perhaps, for me anyway. I find it harder to do them for my own movies. When it's a period film, when it's one of the older classics, then you want to bring out all the detail, all the things that people... My feeling with the Bruce Lees was, of all the Hong Kong movies, they're the movies people have watched again and again and again. So you can actually assume that they may have noticed guy number 5 in the background, and no one's ever said, that's who this fellow is. Yeah. So that became... I figured there was no detail too small to be described. And apparently people found it interesting, because to this day I'm still... on occasion recording DVD commentaries for different movies. Let
me ask you one more fanboy question, and then we'll get onto the book. I promise. Right?
Yes.
And this is really geeky, dear listener. You may want to go away for a couple of minutes. All of the previously lost Game of Death footage, that's on that marvelous Game of Death double disc.
Yes.
How did you personally, kind of find those? How did that come about?
Well, I was hired by... My first major gig at a film company here was with a company called Media Asia, who at that time were distributing the library of Golden Harvest films, including the Bruce Lee movies. And they're just taking delivery of lots of film elements and print materials from Golden Harvest. And I've always been incredibly lucky in terms of my timing and in terms of my access, where it's come to Hong Kong films or Chinese kung fu cinema. And so I joined the company just when that happened, and therefore had the authority to go into the archive and say, I'm vice president of whatever, can you show me any footage you have of Bruce Lee? And so they started lacing stuff up. It was indeed a fanboy's dream. Ian, seriously, you would have... I don't know what you're allowed to say on your show, but I mean, you would have had you would have had a physical reaction, I think, to sitting there watching all of this unfold. And then there was the grandmother. There was this guy called Larry who was like the crypt keeper, and he goes, and there's these reels of film here with Game of Death on them. We're not sure what they are.
Oh, baby.
And I was like, well, lace them up, big boy. And I sat there, and I've never, I don't want to, people have asked me, like, and I think, in a way, they're thinking, well, probably it was just another day at the office for you. Absolutely not. I mean, I had poured over, for people who aren't aware, just brief recap, Bruce Lee in 1972 shot fight sequences for a film called Game of Death, and he was fighting, the most famous person would be Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the basketball player.
Yeah.
And he shelved the film to go and make Enter the Dragon, and he died before he could come back to making it. And the years passed, then in 1978, Golden Harvest took that footage and cobbled together a completely different film, and they used a minimal amount of the footage Bruce Lee had shot in 1972 of him in the yellow tracksuit, you know, the thing Uma Thurman has in Kill Bill.
Yeah.
And all of us fans wondered how much more was left, what else was there that we hadn't seen. And over the years, you got a few clips of this documentary called Bruce Lee the Legend, where they showed some of what they call outtakes and stuff, but it was footage from Bruce Lee's version of the movie. And then we dreamed about and pored over the documentary and looked at stills in magazines and what else is there. So this was something that had been really in the back of my psyche since I was, you know, a teenager. So I go into this screening room and they started screening. There was lots of other bits and pieces like the raw footage they'd used for the credit sequence of the finished 1978 Game of Death.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, another character in Game of Death running up the stairs to fight Dan Inosanto, who's one of the characters in the movie, who also was a student of Bruce Lee. And it was just, then he did it again, then he did it again. And I mean, if you have worked in the film industry, you realize what you were seeing was dailies, which were all the kind of the printed shots, the kept shots from Bruce Lee as a director, shooting in sequence, pretty much. And it had been put together in sequence as to how Bruce Lee originally saw his Game of Death. And I still get goosebumps kind of talking about it. And I was like, this is the mother lode. And then watching through, and I'm not a great, I mean, I've heard these people over the years say, I was possessed by the spirit of Bruce Lee. I've never had that lucky experience. I've been possessed by the spirit of Jack Daniels a few evenings. But that particular time, there's a shot from a fight between Bruce Lee and a Korean expert called Chi Hon-soy, when Bruce Lee walks up to fight his opponent, and he just raises his hand in like a kind of a gesture of, in Cantonese we would say mansao, like asking hand. Yeah. And he just raises his hand towards him, and I just felt this energy and presence coming off the screen, almost pushing my chair back. And that's the only time I've had anything close to a mystical Bruce Lee experience. And I've been around the back lot of Golden Harvest, where he made all his movies. I've been there at midnight waiting on the ghost of Bruce Lee, and he never showed up. So I'm open to it. But that was the one time I felt this presence. And then I watched the footage through to the end and emerged from the crypt into the daylight, and I was just stunned. Yeah. And then I kind of had to explain to my colleagues at Media Asia, who were not Bruce Lee fanatics like me. I mean, who is, right? And they were like, just why this was so important. And they only realized it when a buyer from Japan came in to license the footage, and he made an offer, and I went in to see Thomas Chung, who was the head of the company, and he said, you idiot, you put the decimal points in the wrong place. And I said, no, that is the offer. And he went back in to see the guy, and he said, I'm so sorry, this is a junior colleague of mine, he's not very good at maths, and obviously this isn't your offer. And the Japanese guy looked and said, no, this is my offer. Wow. And the guy was like, well, done. And they shook hands. That's when they realized this was a BFD. I don't think I can say what BFD. B is big, D is deal, and the F. You know. Bey, listen, we've got to get you on to talk again. But we've got a few more minutes. Tell me about the book, Bruce Lee and I. It's coming out, it's January of next year, is that right? It's first quarter 2017. Okay. It's with Mark Wiley at Tambury Press, and we haven't got a definite set in stone release date. Of course, nowadays so much of it is will be like the Kindle edition.
Right. Okay.
So you're not tied to print schedules as you might have been previously. But it's basically Bruce Lee examined from my perspective as something of an authority on Bruce Lee, but also, perhaps more importantly, as a Hong Kong film historian and also as an active Hong Kong filmmaker. The only non-Chinese person that's been an active film producer in Hong Kong over the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And so my perspective of him from working side by side with people who really work with Bruce Lee, again, in the same capacity, and speaking the language and being able to, if you get somebody in an interview situation, they might be self-censoring slightly, but when you work with them and you're at 3 a.m. on the movie set and you say, well, what was Bruce Lee like? And they tell you a story, you kind of get more of the real deal. So it's a book. I tried to make it a book that only I could write based on my life experience, which might sound obvious, but there's been so many biographies of Bruce Lee and so many kind of stories telling the story. He lived in America, he made these films, then he passed away, and it's been the same story repeated. I felt you didn't need that. So I hope people will, when they see my book, feel that there's a fresh approach based on my life experience. So I'm very exciting, and now I feel this will be my definitive word on Bruce Lee after the commentaries and after this book. If anybody asks me a question about him, I can just say, well, look, read the book or listen to the commentaries.
Can you believe that where you've ended up and what you're doing? I mean, if you go back to when you were a kid and you were watching Kung Fu and watching, and you're living the dream, aren't you, Bey? I don't know, it's not as simple as that, of course it's not. But
if somebody would have said to me when I was like 19, when I first really got into this stuff, that, if I could look that far ahead, what would you like to be doing when you're, as I'm now 55, just turned 55? It would probably be, I would be living in Hong Kong making Kung Fu movies. I would have a Kung Fu school, and I would have every piece of memorabilia in every movie possible relevant to Hong Kong cinema. And all of that happened. What I wouldn't have anticipated, I think, was the satisfaction and happiness of having a family, which, of course, takes precedence. Yeah. I would never have imagined that when I was 19. And to my shame, for most of my adult life, I would look askance at people who were, happy family men. I would be like, what the hell are you wasting your time doing that when there's Kung Fu movies to be made? Come on, love's love, but this is Kung Fu movies. So that came happily and unexpectedly a little later for me. But I certainly felt blessed to have lived it. And it goes from when I was in the Peterborough Odeon cinema, like the intermission of Born Free, and I saw a black and white picture of Bruce Lee in Enter the Dragon. Yeah. And there's a direct line between seeing that and where I am today, which I think is relatively unusual.
And you mentioned the movie production. Anything we can see over here? I mean, I'm sure
all of the. The last run, the earlier film, my earlier movies like Twins Effect and Dragon Squad, The Medallion, are all, I'm sure, available on various home video or television platforms. Of the recent run, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Sword of Destiny is on Netflix globally, so you can see it there.
Oh, beautiful.
Lady Blood Fight will be coming out. I'm going to say it's just played in Asia in the theaters, but I think globally it's going to be on DVD, Blu-ray, and Netflix. And Kickboxer Retaliation, the Kickboxer Retaliation is, bear with me here, the sequel to the remake of the Jean-Claude Van Damme movie Kickboxer.
Okay.
The sequel was called Kickboxer Vengeance. I didn't work on that. That got a brief theatrical release in the UK and is available now on home video formats. And I believe Retaliation, the same plan. It will play briefly theatrically in England and in America. And I'm actually on screen. I'm the double for Christopher Lambert in that movie, so it was my other claim to fame. That was a lot of fun. We had a huge fun time making that movie. It was with Jean-Claude Van Damme, Mike Tyson, Alain Moussi is the star of the movie. We had a lot of MMA fighters in there, and Christopher Lambert from the Highlander films as the bad guy. It was just great. We had a really good time doing that in Thailand.
We're out of time. We'll get you on again at some point if you're up for it. Honestly, it's such a thrill to talk to you, man. I remember seeing your name in Combat Magazine in the 80s, and
thank you.
The work you've done is just wonderful, Bey. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. I appreciate it.
Thank you, mate. Take care. Bye bye. And happy birthday for earlier this week. Gosh. 15-year-old me is grinning like a lunatic.